going on throughout the series as a whole and this particular issue. But certainly a young writer by the name of Jeff Johns would look at this story and take this idea of the Spectre failing to stop Hal Jordan, put it in his back pocket, and explain why the Spectre could not stop Hal/Parallax years after the story is told. And then following the resetting of the timeline, following the conclusion of 0 Hour, there was 0 Month, in which all of the ongoing titles received a 0 issue as a way of revisiting the character's origin, key events in their backstories. This was a point where writers were able to tweak certain elements of their characters' post-crisis history. They were able to insert details, provide important revelations, and we certainly see that in the Spectre issue number 0. Now, what we see in issue number 0, I want to argue, is something that we would have seen even if it weren't for 0 Hour and 0 Month. Right from the beginning of this volume of the Spectre, Mr. Ostrander and Mandrake were teasing that there was something more to the nature of the relationship between Jim Corrigan and the Spectre. There were different characters that the Spectre confronted who gave hints that the Spectre was much more than Jim Corrigan's soul that was infused with some special power. There was a suggestion that the Spectre was something else, an entity on its own. And I mentioned this in previous Spotlight episodes. This was something which Doug Munch and Neil Gaiman were also working towards. But here, Mr. Ostrander and Mandrake got to elaborate on this, and having that 0 issue was actually the perfect opportunity in which to finally present their major revelation, which had, or rather still has, major ramifications for the Spectre's status quo. This revelation is something which has influenced all Spectre stories since the time that issue number 0 was published. So, in the 0 issue, the scene opens at a hospital, and there are 2 nurses who are looking at the body of a newborn who is very ill and is fated to pass away. And the nurses can only hope that this time will come sooner rather than later. And after they leave the nursery, we see the Spectre appear. And this certainly gives the reader great cause for concern. Given how vengeful the Spectre has been, one can only panic at the thought of why the Spectre is in a nursery looking out for an ill child. It turns out that the ill child is actually the reincarnation of a longtime foe of the Spectres. This enemy's name is Beltane, and Beltane explains to the Spectre that they have met over the course of many different incarnations, and at times Beltane has been male, at other times female, and Beltane knows that his time is short here, but he wants to give the Spectre something of a gift. And Beltane explains that the Spectre does not recall certain things because in each incarnation, the Spectre is basically a blank slate. But here, in this lifetime at least, Beltane is going to let the Spectre, and thus the reader, know the Spectre's exact origins. And so it is explained that shortly after creation, there was a rebellion in heaven, and there were a group of angels who fell from grace as they sided with Lucifer in rebelling against God. And one of those angels was named Raguel. And Raguel was transformed by Lucifer into a bat-like demon called Astar. And we see Astar shaped like a little bat, wearing what appeared to be a hood, very much the way the Spectre wore his hood. And Beltane explains that shortly after rebelling, Raguel / Astar felt repentant and went to the Archangel Michael to seek forgiveness and to seek atonement. And Michael's response to Astar was that while he appreciated Astar's wish to repent, he could not go back to being Raguel. Too much had happened in too short a time, and Astar could not return to heaven. However, if Astar was truly repentant and wanted to make amends, Michael could imbue Astar with an aspect of God and turn Astar into God's vengeance, and in that way Astar could carry out an important mission on God's behalf. And Astar considers this and asks, well, may I still retain my memories of who I was? And Michael says, no. As part of your punishment, you will not remember anything of your past. You will not remember being Raguel. You will not remember being Astar. You will only be God's wrath. And Astar considers this, and in the end decides, well, so be it. I hope, though, in time, that I can retrieve part of my memory of who and what I was. And with that, Michael imbues Astar with the wrath of God, and Astar is transformed into the Spectre, or the Spectre Force, as it has been called by certain writers. And it's explained that the Spectre, or Spectre Force, carried out a number of acts of vengeance related to certain biblical events until the time that Christ was born. And at that time, Michael recalled the Spectre and said, God's mercy and vengeance cannot walk the earth at the same time. So, Spectre, you must go into exile. Following Christ's crucifixion, the Spectre was recalled to continue its mission. But then after a time, Michael recalled the Spectre once more and said, in following the example of Christ, all aspects of God must be bound to a mortal soul. And because you are the spirit of vengeance, you must be bound to the soul of a mortal who has been murdered unjustly and who desires vengeance. And so Michael transforms into Kali and directs the Spectre to a man in India named Karaka. And I should say here, this is a neat plot development by Ostrander-Mandrake, in that they're showing that the Judeo-Christian God takes on many different forms. And this lines up with the theory that many people have, in that there is one God, but people from different religious backgrounds view God in a different way. But in the end, all gods are the same. So in this case, Michael, as Kali, seeks out Karaka, who has just been murdered along with his wife and child by Beltane. And Karaka's soul screams out for vengeance. And so Karaka is made the first human host of the Spectre. And this Spectre has Karaka's thin mustache, thus setting the precedent that the host can influence the Spectre's visual appearance. And Beltane goes on to explain that over many different incarnations, Beltane has done battle with the Spectre. There was even a female Spectre. At one time, she was the victim of a group of evil highwaymen. But there she defeated Beltane as well. And so as Beltane is dying, he explains to the Spectre that the Spectre is indeed a separate entity and that there is a human host who is not the Spectre but is the host. And so there's a symbiotic relationship between host and human. So, given what came before during the Munch run with Gaiman's books of magic, this wasn't, I'd say, a complete surprise to fans, but this was a confirmation of what fans had been considering for years. The idea that Jim Corrigan was not entirely the Spectre. Certainly he lived in a very close symbiotic relationship with the Spectre. They both shared each other's memories, their thoughts, but in the end they were two separate beings. And in the Desecration arc, we will get more insight on the nature of the relationship between the Spectre and the host, as well as a really neat storyline involving Clarice, Clarissa, Jim Corrigan, the Spectre, and even Karaka, as well as the return of another Silver Age villain. So, folks, I've got a lot to cover on part 5 of episode 124. I'm thinking that it's going to take at least another 3 parts for this episode, but given the feedback I've been receiving so far, I don't think anybody really minds that. And again, I feel it necessary to really go into detail on the Spectre run because, as I mentioned some time back, to the best of my knowledge, there is no dedicated Spectre podcast. And this is just such a beautiful run. I can't help but talk about it. So lots of good stuff coming your way for at least another 3 recordings of Comics in History. And that will no doubt set a record for longest episode of Comics in History. In the meantime, while you're waiting for episode number 5, you can email me at comicsandhistory@gmail.com or head on over to Facebook and like the Comics and History Facebook page. Until another 2 weeks have come and gone, this class is once again in recess.